So poor George Bailey, at this point, he has all the wisdom of a 22-year-old. You know, the age when you not only know it all, but you've also arrived at the world now where, needless to say, the world has been waiting for you to show up and fix everything with your ideas that nobody's ever thought of before. And basically, as George is sitting there, his dad asks him to come back and work at the building and loan. But did you catch one of the things that George said there? He said, I don't want to do that because I want to do something big. I want to do something important. And he says that he doesn't want to sit there and figure out how to save 3 cents on a length of pipe. Which is interesting because he wants to go build skyscrapers and bridges and airfields. What do you think a young engineer would probably be doing working on those things? Probably calculating how to save 3 cents on a length of pipe or steel beam or whatever, right? Which is funny because when I think about that, I always thought that being a pastor would be, you stand up here on Sunday, you deliver a sermon, you step down and everybody tells you how wonderful you are. And then you go home and you come back on next Sunday and that's it. That's the end of the story. It's like, most of us, we know most pastors only work on Sundays, right? And I just have to keep asking, sheesh, what am I doing wrong? So here's George. He's turning down a good job because he wants to get a different one. But why? Because George wants to be important. When he's done with his job, he doesn't want to be the guy that saved his business X number of dollars. He wants to see a giant skyscraper or a long bridge. He wants to be the guy that made that sculpture, that idol to himself. He doesn't want to be a piddly executor of a building and loan like his dad. He wants something bigger. So here, poor George is struggling with pride. Here I am, look at me, I built that, I did it. And it's funny, when we think of pride and proud people, we think of those very loud, boisterous people, right? That's the proud one because he's loud and he's always saying too much. But it's interesting because, certainly those people can be proud, but often that's just the most annoying version of pride. But it's not the only version of pride. Really, it's the silent moments of self-righteousness that can be a lot more dangerous to us. The stuff that's disguised as piety and humility. And this morning, we're going to look at a story in the Bible about that very thing. We're going to look at a story about pride. And the great thing about this story is it doesn't just call out the people who are obviously struggling with pride. It also invites us to take a look at ourselves to see where we might be struggling with the issue of pride. So if you're following along with your sermon notes, today's message is called Before the Fall. And we're going to be in Luke chapter 18, looking at verses 9 through 14. And in this story, we're going to see two very different people. They're both very different on the outside, but they're also both very different on the inside. One of them is a Pharisee. Now, Pharisees at that time were thought of being as like the models of righteousness, right? They were very devout, very disciplined, very dedicated to their faith. You would assume that these were the most holy men on the planet. The other guy we're going to look at is a tax collector. You couldn't get more opposite, right? Tax collectors were despised and they were seen as the worst possible sinner you could be in their area because these were traitors to their people. They were Jews who decided they were going to work for Rome and help them out and collect these taxes that were unfair and burdensome to the people. And so people hated tax collectors. But in this story, Jesus flips the script on what they would expect. He does this to teach them that it's not about the outward appearance of a person. You may look a certain way, but what's more important is what God is concerned with, and that is our heart. So let's take a look at this story and let's see how it goes. We'll read through the whole thing. Luke chapter 18, verses 9 through 14. It says this. He also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and treated others with contempt. 2 men went up into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, prayed thus, God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week, I give tithes of all that I get. But the tax collector, standing afar off, would not even lift his eyes to heaven, but he beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. So let's start by looking at the prayer of the Pharisee first. He starts off by listing everything he does right. I pray, I fast, I give money, right? Me, I. Thank you, Lord, for making me so great. He doesn't ask God for anything. He doesn't ask him for help. He just thanks him. Hey, thanks that I already have everything under control, Lord. Appreciate that. I'm good. He doesn't ask him for mercy because he doesn't think he needs it. But notice that he also realizes everything else that everybody else does wrong. Right? Thank you, God, that I fast and I pray and I'm so wonderful, and thanks that I'm not like them, who, by the way, are doing this and this and this wrong. He actually says, God, thank you that I'm not like other people. God, the best thing you did was make someone like me. Thanks so much that I don't need to ask for help. You know, the reality is, church, just like this Pharisee, we can become so completely blind to ourselves sometimes. You ever heard of being biased before? You ever been accused of being biased? Nobody? Well, let me tell you what it is anyway. Did you know that every person just has a natural bias towards themselves? We just can't help it. Here are some examples. There's something called confirmation bias. We've all probably heard of this one before. This is when we actively seek out information to support our own views and reject any information that contradicts our view. Okay? So, for example, I knew a lady who wanted to divorce her husband, but she didn't want to get in trouble for it. She didn't want to be accused of being sinful. So what did she do? Well, she did her research by going to a website called lifesavingdivorce.com. Okay? Now, what kind of information do you think she got there? Balanced, neutral information? Probably not, right? Because the truth was, she didn't want to know what the Bible said. She just wanted to find a source that was going to tell her what she already wanted to do was acceptable. Okay, she just wanted to confirm what she already believed. That's confirmation bias. I can't be wrong, so let me find the things that tell me I'm not. All right? Then there's another one called hostile attribution bias. You ever heard this one before? Nobody? Well, let me tell you what it is. This is where we give ourselves the benefit of the doubt in a situation, but we assume the worst motives in other people, okay? So for example, like if I cut someone off on the highway, right? And I'm like, I'm sorry, I just needed to get in there. It was the only space. I didn't see you. I'm sorry, give them the wave, right? But when we get cut off, even if they wave at us, it's like, you stupid jerk, you can't even be considerate. All you think about is yourself. Right? For us, we give ourselves the benefit of the doubt. It was a mistake, I messed up. For other people, it's like, no, you are the problem. Okay? Same situation, but in our version, we're innocent, and the other guy is always evil. There's another one called actor-observer bias. Anybody heard of this one? Let me tell you about this one. This is basically, when I mess up, it's because of external circumstances. When you mess up, it's because of who you are. All right? So example, my dad is famous for this one. But let me tell you why. Let me tell you why. That was the worst part, okay? Here's why. Hey, Dad, why do the Lions always lose?
Why do they always lose?
Yeah, when the refs. It's always the refs. It's always the referees, right? Always the ref. It's not because they missed blocks or they threw too many picks. It's the refs. They always made bad calls. But when the Lions win and the other team loses, I've never once heard my dad go, the Lions won because the refs helped them out. Never heard it, right? It's because the other team couldn't cover zone, they couldn't stop the run or whatever, okay? So that's the thing, is it's like, for the Lions, it's always the external circumstances, right? For the other teams, it's always them that's the problem, right? But in reality, that's kind of a funny one. But we do that in real life with other things, where it's like, no, like I can't help that I have this problem. It's the external thing that did it. Oh, something went wrong at work. It couldn't be me. It's the fact that that machine broke because somebody else ordered the part that wasn't right, or whatever the case is. But when somebody else messes up, it's because they're an idiot, right? That it's all because of you. The problem is with you, it's no longer the mechanical failure or whatever the case might be, okay? See, the reality is that there's lots of different biases that we might have, but in all of them, they include an inability for us to see our own faults for whatever reason, but we hardly ever struggle to see the problems with other people. So when we look at the Pharisee now in Jesus' story, he's so sure of his own righteousness that he can't even imagine the possibility that he might need mercy. He's blinded by his own pride. So if you got your Connect card on the way in church, here's your next fill in the blank, or your first fill in the blank. Pride is dangerous, and we need to be vigilant about eliminating it. Pride is dangerous, and we have to actively pursue getting it out of our lives. Because if we just sit back and think we're good, it'll just take us over. Self-righteous pride convinces us that we're better than other people. And worse, we start to think that God owes us something because of our goodness. Like, I'm so good that I could do it on my own, and God owes me because I'm so great. You know, I was interviewed on a podcast like 2 weeks ago, and I was asked about depression in the church and what I've seen as a pastor that's starting to infiltrate the Christian community. And the host told me that she used to struggle with depression, and she blamed God for it. She said, I thought everything was horrible and I could do nothing about it. And she said, I blamed God for not making me happy when I should have been looking at me and for the reasons that I may not be happy. So many people are angry at God because we assume he owes us good things. But if we're honest about who we really are, we know we don't deserve anything good at all. But the problem with that is that it requires us to be honest with ourselves, to take a real critical look at who we are and the mistakes we've made and what our actual value is. But what we like to do instead is we like to tell ourselves lies, that we're great, that we're deserving, that we're intrinsically valuable. But we're not. Because the only reason we have value at all is because God has determined our value, because we are his, because we need to know that our goodness doesn't come from us. Here's what the Bible says about us by ourselves. Isaiah 64:6. We have all become like one who is unclean, and all our righteous deeds are like a polluted garment. We all fade like a leaf, and our iniquities, like the wind, take us away. We may not say it out loud, but in our hearts we start to believe that our good works, that our moral living, or even our church attendance are the things that make us acceptable to God. But the problem is that even the most seemingly moral people, the ones that look so good on the outside, they have the easiest time falling into this trap of pride. It's easy to start thinking, I'm doing well, and I'm better than that guy over there. Look at him. Mustard stains on his shirt. Can't even get to church on time. I'm doing pretty good. God must love me. And we forget the reality that Romans 3:23 tells us, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. I like to think of it this way. Each of us is a broken crayon in the box. Some of us are broken more than others, maybe broken in different places, but none of us is a good crayon. We're all the crayons that you'd put in a Ziploc bag when you're done with it and tuck it in the corner in case you ever need it someday. Those are the crayons we are. But we think, oh, well, I still have the paper on me, so I must be okay. It's like, no, we're all messed up. Each and every one of us is messed up. But we look at other people and start to think that we're not, because we're better than them. So that's the issue with the Pharisee. But now let's look at the prayer of the tax collector. Okay, what does he say? The tax collector, in stark contrast to the Pharisee, by the way, is the one who ends up justified before God at the end of the story. His prayer is short, it is simple, and is full of humility. All he says is, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. He doesn't list his good deeds. He doesn't boast of his righteous actions. God, forgive me and have mercy on me, even though I did help that guy last week. He doesn't come up with any list of anything good about himself. He just says, here's my sin. I beg of your mercy. It's my only shot. I mean, look at his posture. He's standing at a distance. He's in private. He can't even lift up his eyes to heaven. He's beating himself because of how miserable he is when he looks at himself. And this reflects a deep awareness of how unworthy he actually is. And what makes the tax collector's prayer so powerful is he honestly looks at himself before he talks to God. He takes an honest look. And at this point, what is he going to say? He knows he has nothing to offer God except his need for mercy. He doesn't try to justify himself or compare himself to other people. He just says, I'm messed up and I need your help. What else can I say? In that moment, he recognizes that the only thing that can save him is God's grace, period. So here's your next fill in the blank, church. We must learn that our value doesn't come from us. We must learn that our value doesn't come from us. Now, the issue with this and looking at ourselves and thinking, should we like ourselves or should we just hate ourselves all the time? Is we feel like we have to land somewhere outside of the balance and look at these two extremes. We believe that either A, we have to say, God loves me because I'm so great, or we have to go to the other side and say, God hates me because I'm so terrible. And we feel like there's no other option in the middle. But actually, the real answer is, God loves me even though I'm so terrible. Right? He doesn't love you because you're terrible, because you're great. He loves you even though you're terrible. That doesn't change how he feels about you. And the great thing about that is he loves you even though you're terrible, and he wants to start turning you into something better even now. And ultimately, church, we're going to get there. Eventually, we'll be in heaven. We'll be these perfected beings, right? But in this life, we don't get to hit that status yet. Ultimately, we'll get there, and he starts the process now in this life. But as long as we're on this earth, wearing our earthly flesh, there's going to be tension within us of good and bad, spirit and the flesh battling within us. And God wants to keep encouraging us towards that good side, and ultimately we'll hit the end goal. But in this life, he wants us to move in that direction, even though we'll never hit it in this life. The reality is you're still going to do bad things no matter how much better you get here. And so even if you're the best person that's ever walked this earth second to Jesus, whatever flaws you're still struggling with, that still needs to be repented of. We still need to thank God for his mercy and remember that we needed his mercy when we start looking at other people. You know, when describing what goes on inside the mind of a humble man, right, we start to think like, do we need to beat ourselves up here? And C.S. Lewis wrote this. He said, he's not going to be thinking about humility. He will not be thinking about himself at all. And that's the thing about humility, is we're not supposed to just sit there and keep like rehashing how bad we are all the time or how good we are all the time. We should be thinking about how good God is all the time, how we're grateful for what he's done for us, and how we can go help others. We're not the ones we're supposed to be thinking about all the time. Humility is about turning our eyes away from our own accomplishments and recognizing that we are entirely dependent on God's mercy. So if you want to be humble, just stop thinking about yourself so much. Think about God and his goodness and how you can serve him. Okay, so we've looked at the Pharisee now, we've looked at the tax collector. So let's look at God's reaction to the two of them. At the end of this story, everybody in the audience would have been thrown for a loop. Like totally unexpected, all right? Jesus tells everyone that the tax collector, not the Pharisee, goes home justified. I wonder how many angry Democrats or puffed up Republicans would be shocked to find out that the peaceful or humble people on the other side would have God more satisfied with them than themselves. Like sometimes we look at our political party and we think, I know I'm right, Lord, therefore I'm better than that guy. And I wonder if that very attitude makes God go, well, I like the other guy better than you just because of that. It has nothing to do with your party. Uh-oh, Petey just went political. Do you think God cares about your political party or the name of your church or the style of worship you participate in? So many of us honestly think that we're right with God, and we come to that conclusion by looking at everything external, and we never look at this thing right here. If you want to know where you stand with God, this determines it more than any other affiliation you have. And while at the same time we start looking at ourselves like, I picked this right, and I know this is right, and I'm good at this, and we do that, at the same time we look at other people, we start to condemn them. And we jump to that conclusion without ever looking at their heart either. Because you can't look at their heart. You can see the result of it, but you can never see what's truly in their heart. And Jesus says that, you know what? It doesn't matter if you're a Pharisee. It doesn't matter if you're a tax collector. If your heart is right, that's what God cares about. It's the posture of our heart that leads to justification. Now that word justified there, that's a crucial point here. Because the term justified means to be declared righteous before God, okay? Not because of our works, but because of God's mercy and his grace. You know, sometimes in Christian circles you hear people talk about justification, all right? Think of justification this way. How would you use that word more commonly in a sentence, right? Like if you're setting up your budget, things are tight, and you want to look and see if you can buy a new Lambo, okay? You take a look at the lease rate for a new Huracan, which, by the way, is about $6,300 a month. Now, I don't know your finances, but I would guess most of us can't justify that kind of spending, right? In other words, I can't find a way to make that choice reasonable, right? This is an unreasonable decision. It is not justified, okay? Well, when God looks at us and our sin, he would typically say, I can't find a way to justify letting this sinner into my presence. That would be God's typical reaction to a sinner. Or he would say, I can't find a way to make that a reasonable choice. However, in the situation with the Lambo, if somebody decides to give you an extra $100,000 per month for the rest of your life, you might be able to justify leasing a Lambo, right? So just like in that situation, if somebody else credits their righteousness to us, like, I don't know, like Jesus, okay? then God can justify us being in his presence then. Because he can say, I can justify this because that's my son's righteousness. And so we have a choice. We can stand before God and we can try to justify ourselves like this Pharisee. Hey, Lord, I did all this praying and all this fasting. And then he says, hey, what about this pride problem here? You don't fit. Or we can let Jesus do it for us. But the only way Jesus is going to do it for us is if we humble ourselves enough to admit that we need him to. Which is why, you next fill in the blank, God justifies the humble. God justifies the humble. It is only when we come to God in humility, acknowledging our need for his forgiveness, that we are finally made right with him. In James chapter 4, verse 6, it says, but he gives more grace. Therefore it says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. I don't know how often we actually think about the depths of that passage. Not only does God go to a humble person and offer them grace, but think about this. If you're full of pride, God opposes you. You become God's opponent when you are full of yourself. Is God really the guy you want to be fighting against based on your own goodness? I mean, I can't say anything to your individual status, but I wouldn't recommend that. That seems like a bad idea to me. Ultimately, Jesus takes a look at the situation and he ends it with a very profound statement. He says, for everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. Which is interesting, because Jesus is talking about our humility and our pride here, but he doesn't say anything about if you fast enough or if you pray enough or if you teach as good as the Pharisees do. He didn't say anything like that. And he also didn't say if you're too selfish or greedy or a traitor like the tax collector. No, he just looked at how each person looked at themselves. If you know you need help because you're not perfect, then you fit the bill. But the Pharisee, in his pride, he exalted himself, and so he will be humbled before God. Now, for Jesus' audience, this was a twisted ending. Nobody saw that one coming, okay? And really, for us, you can insert any title into this story. Replace the Pharisee with any pastor, any celebrity, any friend that you love, and take a look at the tax collector and replace him with any leader or politician or family member you don't like. And the situation is still the same. It comes out the exact same way. And you're like, but you don't understand that person over there? They can't fit this story because I really don't like them. Think about that person you don't like. Think about them right now. Oh, there's nobody I don't like. Oh, don't lie. There are people you don't like, whether they're on a grand scale or your next door neighbor or the person that sleeps next to you in bed. There's somebody you don't like. Think about that person. Think about it. Sometimes we don't want them to find God's favor because they don't have our favor. But that's not the measurement. We should be praying for our enemies because even our enemies look like us. Because our enemies are our enemies because we feel like they messed up. But if we take an honest look at ourselves, we know that, well, so did I. Now, there's two observations here. Number one, the story has a surprise, which means we can't just make assumptions about this, right? If it surprised you, right, or it probably doesn't because you probably heard this story before, but like on a cursory reading, if it's a surprise that the good person ends up being unfavored, well, then that means that we can be shocked. There's something we don't know, so we need to have our eyes open. And number two, the other thing is that this is a heart issue, and pretty sure everybody in here has a heart that they need to think about. So that tells me each of us must intentionally examine our own hearts. It's not a natural thing. We automatically want to assume that our hearts are good, but maybe yours isn't. That hatred that you have for a person, that disgust you have for a person, that love that you have for yourself, that's not good, church. We cannot assume that our hearts are right with God. We have to look at them. And even if you're saved and been walking with the Lord for decades, our heart has a nasty way of letting that pride sneak in on us. And so that leads us to the last thing we need to look at. We looked at the Pharisee, we looked at the tax collector, we looked at God's reaction, but now we need to look at our own self-examination. And so as we reflect on this parable, it's important that we ask ourselves a couple of questions. Are we like the Pharisee, trusting in our own righteousness? Are we quick to compare ourselves to others and look down on them? Do we rely on our religious duties, our good works, our moral superiority as the basis for our relationship with God? Or are we like the tax collector, who is fully aware of his need for grace? Do we approach God humbly, acknowledging that we are sinners in need of his mercy? Do we resist the temptation to self-justify and instead confess our weaknesses and failures and trust in his forgiveness alone? And don't be too quick to answer those questions. Really, take some time this week and think about it. Where is my heart? Pay attention to your behavior around other people and the way that you think of others when you're angry or gossiping or cursing them or whatever you're doing. And then look at yourself. Do I really have an honest look? Do I really look at myself and realize that I'm a saved sinner and I need to treat other people like I am, like I'm that way and I understand it? You know, church, I haven't told a hockey story in a while, so here we go. In high school, we had a great defenseman on our team. I'm not going to tell you his name. I'm just going to call him Rusty. All right? So Rusty was our captain. All right? He was a great player. He was really fast. He could stick handle like no other, and he had this wicked slap shot. I mean, he broke a goalie's collarbone through his chest protector. I mean, this dude could just rip one. All right? And we had this really big playoff game coming up, and we were all excited about it. And that week, a week before the big game, Dusty fractured it. Oh, I just said his real name. You don't know him. You've never met him. Okay, Dusty fractured his arm. And every time people from the hockey team would run into each other that week, we'd talk about it. Oh man, what are we going to do? Dusty's hurt. How are we going to win this game? I'd be like, you know what? He's great, but we can win without him. We don't need Dusty. We can do this, guys. Like, we got this. We can win. And then game day comes along, and Dusty's sitting in the locker room in his street clothes as we're all getting dressed and ready and trying to hype each other up. And on one hand, we feel this like downtroddenness of having him not play with us, but on the other hand, we're like really pumped, like, come on, guys, we could do this. And it's like this weird balance, right? If you've ever played a sport and lost a great player, you know the mood. And so once we're all dressed, you know, Dusty wishes us luck, and we all skate out onto the rink, and you know, the rest of the team, we're out there, we're doing our warm-ups, we're getting hyped up, the music is playing, you know. Dun, 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 dun. It's like the 90s, so anyway. So we're getting hyped up. There's about 20 seconds left on the warm-up clock, and guys are starting to finish up their warm-ups and headed to the bench. And suddenly, the side door to the rink opens up, and Dusty, in full gear, skates directly across over to the bench. It was like immediately, it was like the guys were like, yeah, Dusty's here. And the crowd was like, ah. And there wasn't that many people. It was like, so the atmosphere like shifted out there, right? It was like the Mighty Ducks movie, if you guys ever seen it, when he's like, I woke up and the pain was gone. If you guys know what I'm talking about. Nobody's from the 90s? Okay. A few of us? All right. And so I was really pumped up. Like, yes, now we have a chance to beat these guys. Like, I know we were saying we did before, but I didn't believe it. Now I really know we actually have a chance to win this game. And at the end of the game, we did. We won. We won that game. And it was funny because, you know, my best friend Rob was on the team. That's his real name. I'm not even going to try to front anymore. My best friend Rob was on the team, and he was not a Dusty type player, okay? Rob was the guy that would somebody would give him a slight bump and he would flop and throw his gloves and land on the ground, try to draw a penalty, and then he'd get penalized because the flop was so terrible. And he would beat the living snot out of people when they tried to push him out of the crease and stuff. Like he was just a different type of player. And he scored a few goals, but he was just more of an enforcer. He was not the big glory guy, okay? And he skated up to me as we're warming up, and Dusty does his move where he skates over to the bench. We're getting ready to start the first period. He's in the first line, so Rob skates over to me, and he kind of leans on the net, you know. And I had a huge smile on my face like, Dusty's here, man, we're going to win. And he leans on the net, and he looks over at Dusty, and he leans over to me, and he says in very colorful language, gosh, I hate him. I know, right? That's what I said. And I was shocked. I was like, what do you mean? He's our best player. He broke his arm. He's been in pain all week, and now he's going to fight through it to help us win this game. He's a hero. And Rob looks at me, and he goes, dude, I knew from the second he broke his arm that he was going to do this expletive. He's been planning to do this all week so he can get the glory. His arm's probably not even broken. He's not a hero. He's another expletive. Rob wasn't a Christian yet at that point in his life. And then the buzzers sounded to start the game, and we won the game, like I said, and Dusty got the glory, and Rob just rolled his eyes. Now, of course, I was happy that we won the game, but As far as like the hero narrative, like from that point on, like I kind of felt a little duped. Like I fell for it. You know what I mean? And after I thought about it, because I knew Rob was right. These two were really close. They knew each other. He didn't really hate him. He love-hated him. But for me and Rob, we had kind of a different outlook on the situation at the end of the game. You know, church, some of us are really good at tricking other people into thinking that we're so great. We put on that nice show of humility and godliness and competence or whatever it is. And the absolute worst thing is that some of us believe that we can not only trick others, but we can trick God as well. But like my buddy Rob, God sees right through it. What makes this hard is that, like the Pharisee, we're not only tricking other people and trying to trick God, but some of us are also tricking ourselves. So here's your last fill in the blank. It is only by grace that we can stand before God. That's the bottom line. So next time you're angry at someone, stop and think about how you view yourself. Am I really as good as I like to think? And is that person really as bad as I like to think? And are we really so different? And in those situations, that's where God challenges us to find humility. That's where our heart actually exercises itself. Because what Jesus is doing is inviting us into a radical shift in how we view ourselves. True greatness in God's kingdom is not about self-exaltation, but it's about self-emptying. There's no room for pride in the presence of a holy God who gave his son to die for us while we were still sinners. So what we should be doing is praying for a heart that continually comes before God in humility, knowing that we're justified not by our works, but by his mercy. And let us also extend that same grace to other people, rejecting the temptation to look down on those we deem less worthy, and instead embracing the truth that we all stand in need of God's grace. So church, this week is Thanksgiving. It's a time for us to be thankful, and it's a time for us to look at ourselves and realize what we have to be thankful for. Because the truth is, there's a God out there who loves you so incredibly deeply, provides that value for you, and loves you so much that he would send his son to die for you. And to me, I think that's a lot to be thankful for.